And the bottom line for the whole series is the secret to having more joy is when our story aligns with his story. Like his truth matters, right? God's story is the truest truth. And so if we're going to experience more joy, then we need to live by his truth. You cannot have true joy if you're trying to get it outside of his truth. So in part one, we defined joy, and we explained that its source is actually found in God. That joy, we took this definition of joy that Kay Warren gave, which was really long, and I shortened it to this. Joy is a sense that everything will be okay because of God. That's joy. It's not like happy, happy, happy. I mean, it's not like this euphoria experience. It's a settlement in your heart. No matter what the outside circumstances are, it's going to be okay because of God. And we actually said it comes down to trust, that joy is an outward sign of inward trust in God. And so that in today's message, we're going to focus on things that try to rob you of joy. Anybody have a little joy robbers in your life? Things that just like to steal your joy? Now, some of you is like, yeah, I have kids. Others are like, yep, I'm married, sitting next to my little joy robber right now, whatever. Now, next week, we're going to wrap up the short series by laying out a game plan, laying out some practical steps that we can take that, if followed, turn to your neighbor and say, if followed, all right, will result in more joy. If followed. That's the key part to the game plan next week. Now, this week, though, joy robbers. So when you think about things that rob you of joy, like what kind of things do you put into that category? When you think about, okay, what steals my joy? Is it your boss? Is it your kids? Is it your spouse? Is it your teacher? Is it just people? Is it your circumstances? Is it the Packers defense? Right? How many of you, they stole a little bit of joy from you this year? I mean, right? Chiefs defense, I can testify to that. How about the weather? There are literally people that their mood really determines and goes by the weather, or traffic, or a combination thereof. Traffic, I have allowed strangers to steal my joy before. People I don't know and will never see again, but because of the way they drove or the way they didn't drive, I allowed it to steal my joy. Can you relate to that? So what are the joy robbers in your life? Because if you really want to have more joy in your life, one of the things that I think is so critically important is it doesn't do you any good, like next week doesn't do any good to focus on what gives you more joy unless you figure out what leaks the joy you have. Because if you don't plug up the leaks, it doesn't matter how much more you pour in, it just leaks. So today is all about where are we leaking joy? Where are we losing joy? Where are we allowing joy to be stolen from us? We got to shore that up first, and then next week we're going to talk about habits that will bring more joy. Because right now, and you're not going to like this, but right now you are experiencing the level of joy that you are due to how you have programmed your mind, your life, and your heart. The level of joy that you're experiencing right now is what you've programmed your life for. Sorry. Proverbs 4:23 says this. This is our text for today. Guard your heart above all else. Why? For it determines the course of your life. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. In other words, what you allow in your heart will direct your life. You are the gatekeeper of your heart, no one else. And so what you allow in is going to direct your life. Now I want you to imagine that this is a hot plate. Ouch, it's hot. Okay, this is a hot plate, and we have a pot of boiling water. You can see just the turmoil and the chaos of the boiling water. It's maybe coming over the side. I mean, it's just boiling, for all of its worth. And I want you to imagine that. And the boiling water is your negative emotions. All right, are you with me? Fear and anger, everything's just boiling up inside this pot. Now, if I took this big glass, see my glass? Full of ice, If I take that and I dump it in the pot, what happens to the boiling water? It stops boiling temporarily. If I don't do anything with the heat source, it will eventually start boiling again. Now, this illustration, the source of heat, again, is your negative thought patterns, and they've become automatic. Like, you don't have to think about thinking negatively or reacting negatively. You don't have to think about that. You've programmed yourself to just automatically respond negatively, if that's true of you. And so to stop negativity and to upgrade your potential for joy, you either have to have lots of ice, lots of distractions, lots of things that, try to calm down your situation. You either have to have lots of ice or you actually have to turn down the heat. You have to correct your negative thinking. And the ice for people takes a lot of different forms. It could be excessive food. It could be television, the distraction of television or electronics. It could be drugs, both prescribed or non-prescribed. It could be alcohol. It could be chronic busyness. You got to just keep yourself busy because you can't deal with all this stuff, chaos that's going on around you. It could be physical escapes. You got to do something to get out. All of those chill the water momentarily. They calm it momentarily, but they do nothing to eliminate the cause of the heat. See, we do all sorts of things that fuel our negative emotions, and as a result, we end up getting more of what we don't want. Tommy Newberry, in his book, great book, by the way, The 4-8 Principle, talking about Philippians 4:8. We'll talk about that quite a bit next week. But he says this: when you find yourself emotionally low, you can be pretty sure that you've been dwelling on what's not working. Like your focus has been on what's not working. He goes on to list some particularly negative thought patterns that tend to derail people's lives. And so I want to go through these. And you will recognize some of these patterns in people, and I want you to hear that. See if you can recognize any of these. Amplifiers. An amplifier is a person that magnifies unpleasant situations. And you'll recognize an amplifier because they use certain words like never, always, no one cares, no one, every time this happens. All right, those are the words of the amplifier. They take some negative situation and they magnify it. They make it way bigger than it is. A feeler, okay, that's the next category of person. They accept negative feelings as true, right? They're experiencing a negative feeling, that's true. It doesn't matter if any evidence points to anything contrary to that. Their negative feeling is truth. Problem is, have you ever experienced a negative feeling that wasn't true? You have, all right? You have, because sometimes negative feelings are distorted and they aren't based on truth at all. And so it's bad to let your feelings steer your life. Next group of people are guessers. Have you ever met a guesser? They just pretend they know what other people are thinking, and then they assume the worst ahead of time. Right? They just know, oh, yeah, that person thinks this, and this is what's going to happen. They just guess. And their entire emotional reaction is just out of whack because they're just guessing. And it tends to ignite a cycle in the other person. How about an exaggerator? An exaggerator is really good at turning a molehill into a mountain. Really good at that. And they have trigger words such as, this is horrible. This is the worst day. You have ruined. Or, things like that. I am outraged. I'm shocked. Those are the words of the exaggerator. This person might also be called a drama queen or a drama king or a prince or princess, whatever. How about an identifier? I've known lots of identifiers. They insert themselves and meaning into situations that often and usually have nothing to do with them. They take things too personally, and they interpret negative events as personal attacks. And they put themselves into the situation when it really isn't about them. A forecaster, they predict the worst case scenario. And before they have hardly any information at all, They're kind of like the prophet, right? They just know this is where this is heading. It's headed this way so many times, and oftentimes they actually create the situation that makes it happen. Cynics. Cynics have a knack for finding something wrong, even if it is the only thing that's wrong. Like everything else is good, but they find that one thing. They can sniff out the one thing that's not right. So despite the good around them, they use their mental radar to actually see the bad. And let me give you one way that this fleshes out. Let's say you're married and your spouse has 10 positive qualities, like 10 great qualities, they're amazing. But they also have 10 qualities that aren't. Not so great, right? There are 10 characteristics that are kind of negative. And guess what? So do you. You have 10 and 10. We're just making an easy math here for us this morning. Your experience of your spouse will depend almost entirely which 10 you focus on. If you focus on the 10 positive characteristics of your spouse, your experience of your spouse is going to be pretty great. If your focus is on the 10 things that they need help with, the 10 things that I could just tweak them here and tweak them there and I can turn my magic dials, if your focus is on the 10 negative qualities, your experience of your spouse is going to be more negative than positive. The cynic goes, oh, there's just this one thing here, though. I got to fix that. 2 more. Blamers. Blamers point the finger at others for their own problems, even though it's very rare for your problems to be caused entirely by somebody else. Blaming others is ultimately paralyzing for you. Because why? Because it depends on somebody else changing instead of you. Last one is justifiers. Justifiers remind themselves and others of all the reasons why they're entitled to this negative reaction. And it manifests itself in phrases like, if you only knew what he did, and it usually has a little head bob with it. If you only knew what he did, or I deserve to be upset. That's a justifier. Now, how many of you, as you were listening to that list, went, yeah, I know the person that's that. I know a person that's that. I know this. How many of you could think of some people that fit in these categories? How many of you are too busy going, this is me, this is me, this is me, that you didn't worry about anybody else? All right. Yeah. How you talk to yourself or about yourself has tremendous power. See, you are the gatekeeper of your heart. So what you allow in your heart will direct your life. Proverbs 18:21 says, the tongue can bring death or life. That includes how you speak to yourself. James 3:5-6 says, the tongue is a small thing that makes great speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It can set your whole life on fire. Ephesians 4:29 says, and never let ugly or hateful words come from your mouth. And I would add to that, about others or about yourself. But instead, let your words become beautiful gifts that encourage others or yourself. Do this by speaking words of grace to help them or yourself. See, the words that you mutter to yourself or about yourself, they have the power to encourage or discourage. They have the power to motivate or the power to deflate. They have the power to produce joy or they have the power to remove it. So you have to start programming your mind by first disciplining your mouth. And that definitely includes the way you speak to or about yourself. What you allow in your heart will determine and direct your life. Now, I want you to imagine a small campfire. Maybe you've been camping and we have a small campfire here. And so first, there's some steps that happen before the campfire gets put out. Right? The first step is you go, oh, the campfire's still lit. I should probably put it out. That's the first step. The second one is you decide now's the time, like I'm going to do something. And the third thing is you actually do something to put it out. You grab the bucket of dirt, right, and you pour it on the campfire out. If your goal is to put out the campfire, if that's the first step, then what you wouldn't do is, here's another log. Or here's a bucket of gas. That'll put it out. I mean, that you would never do that. But when it comes to like negative emotions, that is exactly what I've seen more people do than anything else. Like the way that I get rid of this emotion, this negative emotion that I'm experiencing right now, the way that I put it out is to let it out. And if I let it out, it'll calm down. If I let it out, it'll go down. If I tell them exactly what I think, it'll just calm down. How's that working? Because what we're doing in that moment is just we're just dousing the fire with gas and going, that's how we're going to put it out. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. I've done premarital counseling with dozens and dozens of couples. I believe it's over 100 in the last 16 years. Lots of couples I've done premarital counseling with. And at some point, with every couple, I will give them this illustration. In fact, this is probably the only part of premarital counseling that would be true that would have been involved with all of them. Because sometimes I get led in different directions. This is something I've shared with every single one of them. That each of us is like the man that's carrying two buckets. And one is a bucket of gas, and the other is a bucket of water. And anytime there is a spark of conflict with somebody else, in that case we're talking about a future spouse, anytime there's a spark of conflict, we choose by the words we speak which bucket we throw. And one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest things that can have an impact on your relationship is when you learn to control your tongue and you learn to speak water words. And when a little spark happens, that literally we just go, psh, psh, no big deal, right? Move on. But we have become quite proficient. I don't know, I can't speak for you. But I can think of a couple of times in my life, okay, maybe a few more than a couple, where I have chosen the wrong bucket. And something that really was very small became something a lot bigger because I chose poorly with the words that I spoke. Can you relate with that? Any gas throwers out there? You've at least once in your life you've thrown some gas, right? So here's the question, and it's something that will help you a lot if you get it. How good are you at identifying and using water words? Or are you more adept at using gas words? For a lot of us, that's our native language. And so joy robbers literally are sucking life out of you. When we choose things that rob our joy, we're actually choosing to become weaker in our faith. Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10 says, "Don't be dejected and sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The joy of the Lord is your strength. If that's true, and I believe it is, then when you allow anything to steal your joy, you're actually allowing it to steal your strength. Your relationship with the other person gets weaker. Your relationship with him gets weaker every time that you choose to allow somebody else to steal your joy. Without the joy of the Lord, you get weaker. This is why we have to guard your heart above all else. Why? Because it determines the course of your life. The NIV puts that verse, above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows out of that. For everything you do flows from it. The New Century Version says, be careful what you think because your thoughts run your life. See, what you think matters. What you speak matters. What your heart marinates in matters because what you allow in your heart, will direct your life. All right, we're going to play a game real quick, kind of emotionally heavy in the room, all right? We're feeling the weight of this maybe, but I want to play a game, and it's called Robbers or Givers. Robbers, Givers, all right? So I'm going to give you an action, or I'm going to give you a thought, and I want you to say, if it's something that would give you joy, then you say giver. If it's something that would rob you of joy, say robber. Are we clear? Not very confusing, is it? All right, here we go. Complaining. You guys pick up on this game really good. Fear of the future. Talking good about someone behind their back. Not keeping your word. Worship. Prayer. Living in the past. Gossip. Negative self-talk. Believing and declaring the promises of God. Now, that's not really hard. Like, the answers were obvious for all of us, right? I mean, it really wasn't. Out of all three services today, I had one person for one of those that I tricked them, I think. When I said, when you talk positively about somebody behind their back, they said, robber. That's the only one that I've heard out of three services that got any of those wrong, because the answers are obvious. So why do we consistently fight against what we know to be true? And if we were to ask every single person, if I was to ask you individually, would you like more joy or less joy in your life? I think that everyone in here would say, I want more joy. And yet we hold on to some actions and some attitudes that fight against that. It's like it's our little pet. No, I'm entitled to this, right? You don't know what he did, she did. You don't know. I'm holding on to this. Well, you can hold on to that, but you won't have any room for joy. Focus more on the things that produce joy, not on the things that you know rob it. Because those who experience more joy, and I've discovered this, and I bet you have too, those who experience more joy in their life don't necessarily have more joyful circumstances happening in their life. I've been to third world countries. I've been to several of them, and I have never experienced somebody that had better circumstances than I have. But I've experienced people in those countries that had more joy than I have. It's not based on the circumstances. What I've learned is they think differently. People that experience more joy actually think differently. They guard their heart against joy robbers, and they don't allow robbers to steal their joy. Have you ever considered these scriptures in that context? Galatians 6:7, don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always, turn to your neighbor and say, always. You will always harvest what you plant. 2 Corinthians 9:6, remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. So here's the thing that we have to look at in our life, and for some of you, this might be very uncomfortable. What's the harvest look like? Like, what's the things coming out of my life? Does it look like joy? What's the harvest look like? Because I promise you this is true. If the harvest is joy, it's because you've been planting joy. If the harvest isn't joy, you've been planting some attitudes and some actions that aren't joy. And you're only reaping what you've sown. If you want a different harvest, then you got to plant different seeds. And that's really where we're going next week. One way to tell it of what seeds you're planting is just looking at the harvest. Because what you sow in thought, either useful or useless, manifests itself sooner or later in your circumstances. Your thoughts become the GPS for your life. Because what you allow in your heart, how often is it going to direct your life? It will. Right? Above all else, guard your heart, for it will determine your life. So here's the question. What are you allowing in your heart? What are you allowing in? What are you allowing in your thoughts? Because here's the truth that can absolutely set you free this morning. If you get nothing else, get this. You are responsible for your joy. You're responsible. There's no one else For many of you, that should be great news. Like, it doesn't matter what he said, she said, doesn't matter what the job did, doesn't matter the other situations. They're not responsible for your joy. You're responsible for your joy. And if I'm responsible for it, guess what? That means no one can steal it from me. I can give it over, but nobody can take it. Nobody can steal it from me without my cooperation. And it's amazing to me how often I've cooperated. You would think we would know, and we would not cooperate when somebody else tries to steal our joy, but we do way too often. I want you to say these 3 words with me this morning, and they're painful words. I am responsible. Can you say that with me this morning? I am responsible. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. I'm responsible for my joy. When you decide that no one else gets to choose your joy for you, that no one else gets to choose your frame of mind for you, it can set you free. When you decide that no one has access to your remote control, this is my remote. All the men know what I'm talking about. My remote control, all right? My TV, whatever. When you decide, and don't do that with the TV remote, but when you decide, like, I'm not giving you the remote. Because this is a rule in the car. Whoever's driving gets to decide the radio station. Are you with me? I mean, that's the one. And so you get to decide that. If you're driving, in your life, you don't let passengers touch the remote. You don't let other people touch the remote. I'm responsible. I'm responsible for what plays. I'm responsible. Nobody else has access to my remote. When you take charge of your joy and you feed your heart and your mind good things, it sets you free. See, what you're doing is refusing to be brought down to a lower level. I had somebody after second service, they said, you know, I'd never thought of it that way before, but that's the reason that forgiveness is so important. Because forgiveness isn't important for what it does for the other person. Forgiveness is important because it sets you free, right? It takes the remote back. Because as long as you hold unforgiveness in your heart, you have given them the remote for your joy. When you think or say the words, I'm responsible, it's freeing because you can actually make different choices and not let them have the remote. So the next time you start to feel negative, repeat those not joy-filled words at all, but gut-wrenching words. I am responsible. Now, I have a feeling there's probably somebody in here that might say something like, but you don't know. Like, you don't know what I've been through. And that's true. My question for you is, how long are you going to give that other person the remote? No matter what your circumstances were, if it's abuse last week, last year, or 30 years ago, my question is, how long are you going to give those circumstances the remote in your life? How long are you going to give them the power, that situation the power? How long are you going to give that the control on whether or not you walk in joy? To me, it comes down to whether or not you want to be a victor or a victim. And there is actually a guy whose name was Victor that was an inmate in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II, Viktor Frankl. And he experienced and saw some of the worst that humanity has to offer. He himself, his wife, his mother, and his brother were all killed in the concentration camps. But I want you to, he made this profound statement, and I want you to picture him saying this to one of the Nazi soldiers. That's who he's really saying this to. And this is what he said. The one thing that you can't take away from me is the way that I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Now, think about how powerful that is. Like in any of our lives, that what he's saying is, I'm responsible. Like, you can't take that away from me. You can torture me. You can kill my mom. You can kill my wife. You can kill my brother. You can do all those things. The one thing you can't do to me, you can't take this from me, is you can't choose how I respond. Like, I can respond. You can pour out the worst that life has to offer. I can respond with grace. Isn't that what Jesus did on the cross? The worst things that humanity can do to another. And his response, Father, forgive them. He knew he couldn't let that in his heart. He's the gatekeeper, right? You're the gatekeeper. I have the power to choose. Why in the world would I want to give someone else that kind of power? Why? When I understand I'm responsible, it sets me free and empowers me. I don't have to let someone else determine my joy. So when I take responsibility for my mental diet, for the thoughts that I think and for the things that I allow in my heart, I can experience more joy. You can stop empowering others to steal your joy. You can stop throwing ice on your boiling water. You can stop handing them the remote control, and instead you take responsibility and you go, you know what, I'm going to turn this heat down. You can stop throwing gas. And that will impact your health. It'll impact your relationships. It'll impact your career. And I think it'll impact every aspect of your life. When you put good in, good comes out. In fact, that's God's law of causality. And I've used different words for that, the way that I've expressed that many times, and will continue to say this for the rest of my life because it's a core value of mine, and it's what you feed grows. If you see joy growing in your life, it's because you're feeding joy. If you see joy going down in your life, it's because you're feeding things that rob you of joy. Does that make sense? What you feed grows. Another way that's said in the New Testament is what you will reap, what you sow. So, will you feed on how you were mistreated? Will you feed on all the things that you lack? Will you feed on the shortcomings of your job? Will you feed on the negative characteristics of your spouse? Will you feed on how I never get a break? Or will you feed on the goodness of God? Will you feed on who He is, what He's done, what He's provided for you? Next week, we're going to focus on habits that will bring more in. But if you don't stop the leaks, it doesn't matter how much more you pour in. We got to stop the habits that suck joy out of our life. Remember, you're the gatekeeper. You're the gatekeeper of your heart. What you allow in your heart will direct your life. Every head bowed and every eye closed this morning. There are no results, good or bad, in your life that wasn't first formed in thought. What you allow in your head and your heart matters so much because that's where the direction for your life comes. No change is possible without a change in the way that you think. And so the greatest transformation that's even possible happens when we yield our lives to Jesus, when we invite Him into our heart. It's really like changing operating systems. In fact, one of the ways that it's described is found in Ezekiel 36:26. It says, I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart, and I will give you a tender, responsive heart. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person, that the old life is gone, a new life has begun. And so when we surrender our heart, when we open up our heart to Christ, He does this incredible exchange with us. He takes out the old and the stony and He puts in a brand new heart. And remember, He's the source of joy. So if you want to take that step today, I want to invite you to pray this prayer with me in just a moment. And if you mean the prayer, I want you to take a second step, and I want you to text the number on the screen. And you just text next to that number. And all that does, you're not going to get on a mailing list or a calling list of any kind. All that will do is that you'll get a text with the links for 3 videos that will help you get started in this new walk with God. I want to invite everyone to pray this prayer with me out loud. It won't do anything for you unless you mean it. And if you mean it, it'll change everything. Would you pray it with me? Dear Jesus, I confess that I'm broken, that I have sinned. I confess that I need a new heart. Your word promises that you will take my heart of stone and that you'll give me a new heart. Your word promises that you would transform my life from the inside out. Lord, I surrender. I give you my heart. Change me. Thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you for paying the price for my ransom. Make me new. In Jesus' name. Can we give the Lord a clap offering and praise for anybody that prayed that and meant it?